foremost, I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday evening. Welcome to the New York State TESOL Secondary SIG webinar. We would also like to thank everyone for joining us, and a special thank you to Nadia Kalman and Maggie Valestra for facilitating this wonderful session that we have up ahead. They are with Words Without Border. And so we will get started shortly. Okay, so first I'd like to introduce our secondary SIG members and co-chairs. So we have Stephanie Chu, who is currently in her 10th year as a high school ENL teacher in New York City. She currently works at a transfer school serving overage and undercredited immigrant students. And previously, she worked at an English-Chinese bilingual school. She also served as an adjunct lecturer in Hunter College Master's TESOL program, her alma mater, and she received a BA in Linguistics and Psychology with a minor in French at NYU. We also welcome Tinglei Huang. She's also an ENL teacher at International High School at Union Square. She passionately supports students who are new to the country, guiding them through their English language learning journey and helping them to seamlessly adapt to a new culture. She holds a master's in TESOL from Teachers College at Columbia. And I'd like to introduce myself, Sandra Vargas. I'm also an EB member and VP of Communications for NYS TESOL. I've been an educator for a little over 17 years, and I currently work as an ENL provider and coordinator for the New York City Department of Education. I also serve as an adjunct professor and co-direct our dissertation committee. I hold a PhD in second language research, which is what I'm very passionate about. I'd also like to introduce Christine Seaback, our past president. And we thank her for her support, as well as Christian Petticone and Leslie Painter-Farrell. So welcome and thank you for supporting us. We would also like to give a warm welcome to our facilitators, Nadia Kalman and Maggie Valestra. So a little bit about them. Maggie Kalman is the Global Education Director at Words Without Borders. She is a former teacher of English to speakers of other languages and an author in residence in New York public schools. She holds a master's in instructional technology with a minor in TESOL from Teachers College at Columbia and an EDM in educational leadership from Bank Street. Maggie Valestra is the education program coordinator at Words Without Borders and a translator from French. She holds an MFA in literary translation from Boston University. Prior to joining Words Without Borders, she worked as an English teaching assistant in France. So thank you, both of you, for your support and for your willingness to facilitate this professional development series for us. I'd also like to invite you all to browse through our New York State TESOL webpage and explore all the resources that we have available for all our members. And if you're not a member and would like to join, we welcome you to join our organization. We also invite you to peruse and contribute to our New York State TESOL journal through our blog and Mosaic. And one last reminder, we'd like to remind you of our upcoming conference in the fall, which will be held in Rochester, New York, from November 14th to the 16th. So stay tuned for more information on that. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Stephanie, who will start us off with the content of our webinar. Once again, thank you for joining us.
I'm actually going to pass it off to Nadia and Maggie. They are really our leaders today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thanks to everyone on the secondary committee. And thanks to you all for coming here. This is after what for most people was probably a long school day, and it's night now, and you could be doing a lot of different things. So thank you for being with us. And what we're going to do is talk about this poem that Stephanie mentioned. First, just all of us as adult readers and people experiencing it. And then Stephanie is going to come in and share her strategies for making this poem engaging and accessible for ESL students. But I'm going to also mention some of those strategies as I go through just in passing. And completely optional, but if people feel like turning on their cameras, it always helps me when I'm presenting to like see how people are responding. And we're going to have a lot of stuff in the chat. So if you don't have your chat box open, please open it now. And Maggie will be there talking to you in the chat as I talk to you aloud. If you feel like unmuting yourself and going ahead and speaking, I know it can be like a little bit intimidating, but please do, because it's always fun to hear other people's voices. And if you'd feel more comfortable, if you raised your hand and then were called on to speak, then Maggie will be watching out for people using the hand raise function. This is the first time we'll be working with that though. So if you don't get called on, just please go ahead and speak into the silence. I really want to hear from people while we present. So, okay, with all of that out of the way, let me show you and tell you a little bit about what Maggie and I do, and then I'm going to have a question for you. Okay, here we go. Okay, so you should be seeing a site that says Words Without Borders Campus. That's the site that Maggie and I work on together. We publish literature from all over the world, and we publish it along with a bunch of multimedia and teaching ideas and ways into the literature for students. So just to show you one, we have a poem, and then we have a bunch of tabs next to it that have all kinds of things that you can use with students, and then the teaching ideas. So we're going to go back to this later, but for now, let me just ask you, why do you think we should be bringing literature from all around the world to students learning English? Because obviously, I've been a teacher in the DOE. There are a lot of different initiatives that get sent to us, a lot of different things that are expected of us, and yet you're all here to talk about this kind of literature. So why is it important to you to bring this to your students? And as you think about it, I'm going to play you one video. Maggie might copy and paste a few things, but really I want to hear your voices primarily. So I'll just play you a few seconds of a video, and then we'll go to that.
Authors from other places very interesting, more in particular from Mexico, since that's where I'm from, that's where my family's from. And the fact that today we were learning about a Mexican author, I was just all ears paying attention.
So that's what that student said. And now I'm interested in hearing from you either in the chat, or if you want to just speak out loud, please go ahead. Oh, representation, absolutely. Anything else you're seeing in the chat, Maggie?
Yep, I'm seeing mirrors. I'm seeing inclusion, representation of our students' diverse cultures and backgrounds.
Definitely.
I think in order to help the students engage with the different cultures through the texts, literature allows you to engage the students with diverse cultures which are there in these literatures all around the world.
Thank you, Dr. G. And one word that yes, not just our cultures, but also others. One word that you use that I think is so important is engage with. Because often when we talk about culturally responsive and sustaining education, it's sort of like what you do to to be a decent person in the world and help students be decent too. You show them other cultures so that we can all learn and get along. And all of that is definitely true. This literature does promote those kinds of global competencies, they're sometimes called. But also this literature is highly, highly motivating. And I feel like we don't talk about that as much as we do about the rest. When Words Without Borders was first putting this together, we thought that we would have to really work and sell this literature to students who were unfamiliar with it. But to our surprise, even before they had read a single word of a story from another part of the world, the majority of students really wanted it, because they wanted to learn more about themselves and where they might come from. And they also wanted to learn about their classmates and their friends and just learn about alternatives to the community that they're currently in. So once they had read this literature, the number of students who wanted to read it went up even higher into the 90s. And it seems to be especially good with students who don't usually like to read, for students who might feel disconnected. And the representation thing is so powerful. I'll tell you just one quick story. We worked on literature with an author from Guatemala, with a class of students who are mostly also from that part of the world. And about a week in, all the students suddenly started saying that they wanted to be writers and had always wanted to be writers. They just hadn't mentioned it to us before. And that just shows how inspiring it is to see someone who looks like you doing something creative and telling stories. So that was what I wanted to make sure I said. Anything else on this? Oh, thank you, Will. So with all of this in mind, with the idea of reflection, I'm going to show you a poem that might reflect some of your students' cultures and is probably of a culture that's of interest to others, in part because it's been in the news lately. And this is bilingual, it's high interest, yet it's accessible to read. And sorry? All right, I'll just move on, but Joy, if you wanted to step in, you're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to bring you to this poem. Now, if you have previously read this poem, please don't give away the meaning just yet. Or if you're a Haitian Creole speaker and you understand the words, don't get into the meaning just yet. What we're going to talk about first is the tone. And tone is something very interesting that also maybe sometimes underused with ELLs, but I feel like as a former English learner myself, you become very sensitive to this way people talk when you don't quite know all the words. And that's something we can really draw on to help students understand literature. So as you listen to the beginning of this poem, just think about the tone or the mood or the sound of it, and then we'll talk about it.
Dodo, dodo, ti pitit, pa bat kou. Si ke ou pa bat, c'est l'État qui prête pour faire motel marché. Si vin nous couper, pas fait gros sang. L'État c'est ingénieur, li besoin sang pour couler béton la mort.
Okay. Do you want to hear it again?
Domi,
Let's
domi.
listen to it one more time.
Dodo, dodo, ti pitit, pa bat kou. Si ke ou pa bat, c'est l'État qui prête pour faire motel marché. Si vin nous couper, pas fait gros sang. L'État c'est ingénieur, li besoin sang pour couler béton la mort. Dodo, dodo, ti pitit.
Okay. So what are you hearing? What are the sounds that you are hearing? What does the mood seem to be?
Patronizing.
Patronizing. Yeah, sort of like you're talking to a little kid. Yeah, I see something from Stephanie like that too. Nurturing from Sandra. Anyone else? Oh, admiration or adoration, like affection, yeah. Yeah. Repetition and harmony, calming. Thank you, Deanna. Yeah, these are all things that we hear. Now, for those of you who have read the poem or who know the original language, sardonic. Yeah, we're getting into it now. So I'm going to show you the poem and then I'm going to ask for a volunteer reader. So first look at it for yourself, and if you're interested in reading it aloud, either in Creole or in English to us while we follow along, just let Maggie know in the chat.
Sandra, that would be great.
Oh, thank you, Sandra. Okay, so as she reads it, please follow along. Oh, and thank you, Dr. G. So maybe what we do is Sandra reads the first two stanzas until the concrete of death, and then Dr. G reads the rest. All right, so Dr. Vargas, whenever you're ready, and everyone else, please follow along. You will see quite a difference between the way the poem sounded to you and what the actual words are.
So it says, sleep, little child, go to sleep. Don't budge. If your heart conks out, then state'll use it to keep its wheels turning. If your veins are slipped, don't bleed out. The state's an engineer. It needs blood to pour the concrete of death.
Dr. G? Okay, Dr. Vargas, maybe you can finish it up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sleep, little child, go to sleep. Don't beat yourself up. That's why the cops have jobs. Go on and sleep now. Don't worry. Bull's open another store tomorrow. If I win the lottery, I'll buy you a dream. Sleep, little child, go to sleep. Little child, go to sleep. When mama comes home, she'll bring you a real country.
Wow. Thank you very much for that reading.
I'm sorry for the problem.
No
I was
problem.
able to get the poem in front.
No problem at all. So now that we've looked at it, what is this poem about? And what is it saying? What is it talking about? What are the feelings that come across in the poem? What kind of mood do you think the person was in when he wrote it? This is the poet Jean d'Amérique.
There's a reassurance there. Kind of like how it reminded me of a mother and child dialogue before bedtime, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the structure is like reassuring. Yeah.
I would say that the author is kind of putting those two things in contrast to each other. It's like the comfort that they want to give their child, but maybe the reality of the situation, or what they would imagine would be the reality of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like in the form of a lullaby. But what do you say to a child when things like this are happening? Stephanie writes, I love the contrast between the way it sounds and the actual meaning of the words. Yeah, same, me too. So what kind of, yeah, sarcastic. Sarcastic is definitely a word that comes up here. What else do you hear in the mood? What kinds of emotions do you think inspired
Dark
this?
mood. It's very dark.
Very dark, very bitter.
And
Yeah.
that also in the form of a lullaby.
It gives me the same feeling as in a scary movie when they play the children's lullaby, like the Jack in the Box music, and then something, something scares you. So it's that kind of jarring.
It completely, that never occurred to me, but yes, it's just like a horror movie because it's something that's like familiar and supposed to be comforting, but it's entirely different. And so we've, I mean, a lot of us have had feelings of frustration and bitterness towards whatever part of the world we're from. And let me just talk about that for a minute, because to me, this is like a really important aspect to teaching this poem. So does anyone know what's currently going on in Haiti? Has anyone heard anything on the news or? So,
Yes, I do. I actually had a class full of students from Haiti last summer, and I now have a third of my class who are adults from Haiti, and there is much violence going on. The gangs have taken over the country, and it's highly volatile there at this time.
yeah.
A lot of problems with leadership.
Kind of
And
civil war.
students in my class are extremely worried about family who are still in Haiti.
So yeah, so the gangs were demanding that the president or Prime Minister Ariel Henry step down. He stepped down, but the gangs have taken over, last I read, most of Port-au-Prince, which is the capital, all the ports, so people can't leave. And doing what gangs do to the people who are there. And this poem was written a couple years ago, but you can see that the problems that it describes have escalated since then. So if you have students from Haiti, they may resonate with the emotions that we just talked about in this poem, but they may also want people to know that that's not all there is of Haiti. Those of us who have come to the US from other parts of the world, like I have, and I'm sure many of you have, you know that what's in the headlines is not always the full truth about what it's like there, because what gets into the news is like the worst things that happen and the most dramatic things that happen in your country. And there's a lot more than that. So when we contextualize this poem for students, as we do with all the literature that we publish on Words Without Borders, we want to put it in context of, here's some information so you can understand what's happening, but we also want to put it in context of, there is more to this part of the world than that. And so I'm going to show you what we do, and then I'm going to ask you what context means to you in your own teaching. So I'll show you a little bit of what we do, and if you have anything to add, please do. So first we talk about the author and the translator, especially when it's a really interesting author like Jean d'Armorique, who's inspired by rap and who, and this is kind of what I mean, like his mood in this poem is not all that he feels about his country. He also runs a poetry festival for aspiring writers there. So he has the bitterness, but he also has some hope. And here are some resources about what was going on in Haiti. We've also added some more recent resources about what's happening now. But the one that I want to focus you on is the one that gives that wider perspective. And this is a photo essay called Haiti Beyond the Headlines. And I will just show it to you now, and then I'm interested in hearing what you think. Okay, so after the violence of the poem, and some of you have been seeing violent images in the news as well about Haiti. I hope you see how this opens things up a little bit. Oh, someone's asking for the link. The link is in the blog post, which either Maggie or I can post a link to. The blog post has that video and a bunch of other contextual resources. Oh, good. Thank you, Maggie. Any other responses here? Okay, so I think you see why this is of high interest to a lot of different kinds of students. And I think you have a sense of what we provide. We also have a lot of other literature, which I will show you a little bit about how to search through it later. But for now, I'm going to move it over to Stephanie, who's going to show you how you can make this poem accessible to your particular students. And even if you're not planning on teaching this poem, the techniques and strategies that Stephanie shares are applicable to a lot of different literature. For example, she has a Venn diagram where students compare what they are seeing about Haiti in the news to a broader perspective like what we just looked at, which can apply to a lot of different countries that get stereotyped in the news. So with that, I will turn things over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Nadia. Okay, so before I go into explaining my thinking, I kind of wanted to hear from you guys because I'm sure we have lots of wonderful educators here. I'm curious about what your thoughts are on how to make this poem accessible to ELs, or how might you want to teach this poem in your classes? And just to give a little more breakdown or a little more guidance, you can think about what languages or references might the students need support with in your class, or how might you support ELs in using the informational text to build background knowledge. So if you take a look at, if you had the opportunity to open the blog post that Maggie shared, there's several different links to newspaper article, actually, I'm not sure, news reports and essays that are just really high level, but also really helpful, beneficial for building context for understanding the poem. So as Nadia was saying, part of teaching context includes the wider lens of showing other dimensions or other perspectives. But we also need to be able to build the background knowledge that the students need to understand what the poem is talking about, to understand the references in the poem. And so there's multiple resources to do that, but they're quite high level. So that's what I'm saying when I ask about how you might use the informational text, how you might support ELs in using those informational texts. Nadia also just showed you the Haiti Beyond the Headlines video montage. Again, on the blog post that Maggie shared in the chat box, there's the video montage and an actual photo essay. So since this is something that's very visual, how might you support ELs in using these resources? So I'm going to take some time to create breakout rooms so that we can discuss, maybe 8 minutes to discuss. And then it would be great if at least one person from each group would be able to share out some of the teaching ideas or scaffolding ideas that you talked about. Okay. Maggie also posted the questions in the chat box. If you need a reminder of what they are, you just give me 1 second. It's been a while since I've had to do breakout rooms, but here, I think I've got it. Okay, so I'm going to open all the rooms, and you might see one of our hosts going in and out of the rooms just to hear the wonderful ideas you're sharing.
Welcome back, everyone.
That was such a good conversation in our group. I loved it.
So I'm glad to hear that, and sorry to put you on the spot, but does that mean you're volunteering to share out what your group discussed?
We talked about so many things, it's interesting because we're talking about as a teacher, and then as someone who, say, if you're a specialist in literature, yet a teacher who's a specialist in literature is teaching students from other countries who aren't immigrants. There's a certain way you want to effectively connect students and link them and hook them into the lesson, but also saying how giving their culture a lot of respect, and then also not letting them feel isolated, right? While you're teaching a poem from their native country and saying and going into the and then and somebody in our group said showing images, and I loved her idea because it was making it metacognitive, like thinking of what the students already know about this topic and what ideas spark through the images. And then we talked about possibly a KWL chart. What do you already know? What do you want to know? And then later on, what you learned. And Christian talked about vocabulary building activities. And we all agreed that was important. And then we also talked about the different age groups, teaching, how would you approach a lesson like this for different age group, whether it's K to 12, obviously secondary we're focusing on, or adult, because those are our specialty areas also. And we thought going into the lesson was similar because it's kind of the plight of an immigrant, the bittersweetness, right, of their home country. And then we just talked about the appropriateness and the sensitivity of talking about death in classrooms and violence, and how we would want to make sure that we were sensitive to not trigger any students who may or may not have would be triggered.
Thank you. Can I have someone else from one of the other breakout rooms share out the ideas that you talked about in your group?
I'll go for group one.
Thank you, Deanna.
We talked about some of the scaffolding techniques we would use as far as, doing a multimodality approach with playing the video and playing the audio, perhaps first to see that it's the opposite, perhaps message that you might interpret it as. And the differences with the elementary grades versus middle school and high school, and how you could intertwine that into different connections and lessons with historical aspects versus connections with parents. And what do your parents do when they're putting you to bed at night? Do they read you a book? Do they play you a lullaby? And pre-teaching vocabulary, having the closed caption, slowing down the speed, things like that.
Thank you, Deanna. And one of the other groups?
I'll say some things.
Thanks,
So we talked about maybe the need to differentiate for older and younger learners, as well as for learners who are coming from different countries. Maybe we're more familiar with their context as opposed to others. Maybe you wanted to isolate that cultural context from the language complexity for maybe a first couple of lessons. And the site seems to support that very well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Will. My group? I can also share if no one's willing, if no one wants to. Okay. So in my group, we also talked, we tried to cover a bunch of things, including how some of the language in the poem is maybe going to be difficult, some of the language, some of the references in the poems. And certainly this is something where you may want to offer the opportunity to your students from Haiti, if you have students from Haiti. You may want to offer them the opportunity to share what certain references may mean, but don't be as someone was saying about being sensitive. You want to be sensitive that you're not putting them on the spot, since this is probably an issue that will be really close to home for them. And in addition to that, with the language of the poem, like the words conk out or don't budge in the first stanza, or recognizing what state with a capital S is in the second stanza, or concrete of death, this kind of language might be a little more complicated for the students to understand. So in terms of how, like, the actual presentation of the text, we always want to be amplifying the text, adding line numbers, perhaps pre-teaching vocabulary. I know this is something that a lot of people mentioned, maybe providing a glossary or translation for unfamiliar words, pictures, or visuals, and using the students' L1, leveraging that. In addition to that, just these are some ideas I had for how I might go about teaching the text and how I might go about supporting the students. So I really loved hearing all of your ideas, because some of you shared things that I hadn't thought of. So I want to add on to what you said. So with our L's, collaboration is such a good way to help them think interdependently and co-construct understanding. So because this is a relatively short poem, this could be a really rich opportunity for them to work in groups and closely read the poem and have collaborative annotations, put the poem, enlarge it, put it on a big piece of poster paper, and then the students can discuss and annotate the poem together. When I've done this, I've given them a checklist of ideas to annotate, so that if they feel stuck on, like, oh my God, what idea can I write down now? Or what idea can I share? They can go back to their checklist to help guide them. And then if it's possible, I like to have them rotate their posters at least 2 times and respond to other groups' annotations, so that they get they're seeing different perspectives on the poem, different interpretations. In addition to that, if you're trying to assess the student's understanding, illustration is a great way to have them demonstrate what they're understanding about the poem. And you can ask them to make sure that the visual details in their illustrations, or if any specific quotations that they're highlighting, really reflect the word choice and the imagery and the mood of the poem. I know several people, and in my group, we talked about the really powerful word choice in this poem. When I have the students, analyze literature, diction and imagery is such a key component of that. So there was Susan in my group mentioned how it might be a good idea to have them categorize the words within the poem based on the kind of feeling they create. And I really liked her idea. To add on to her idea, I might give the students a list of words or phrases from the poem before reading and ask them if these words seem positive, negative, or neutral to them. And then have them go back to that list of words after reading to see if they change any of their interpretations of those words and phrases and can determine any additional connotations. I also wanted to provide a little overview of context, or come back to the idea of context and give you a little overview of how you might help your students access those multiple really complex informational texts on the Words Without Borders website. So in the blog post that Maggie shared earlier, there were news reports and essays that give great context for understanding the references in the poem. So in order to, sorry, I'm just going to skip ahead here. In order to help your students with understanding that, you might ask them to collaboratively read those texts or provide side-by-side English version and then a version in the student's L1. You might play around with AI to rewrite the text in a more accessible reading level, but always double checking the work of AI, chunking the text or using key excerpts from the informational texts, or using a jigsaw. Maybe have different students read different texts so that it's less of a load. They don't have to read all the texts, but they're kind of becoming an expert. In my group, we also talked about using the pictures from the photo essay and from the video montage. And as several of you have mentioned, that's a great opportunity for building vocabulary, generating language. You could do a gallery walk. Lady in my group mentioned using See, Think, Wonder to get them to build their background and spark their curiosities and their analysis skills. And in addition to that, you might have them categorize the images, and because if you look at that photo essay, there's a ton of images. So you might have them put those images in categories and explain what those categories highlight about Haiti. So again, they're kind of practicing that analysis skill, making inferences using the images. So yes, as Nadia said, I'll be sharing the link to this, to the PowerPoint that I was just showing. It's really consider it as like a resource tool for ideas for teaching this poem and the related resources on the Words Without Borders website. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Nadia.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie. And I'm conscious of our time, so I'm going to go through things kind of quickly. Let me say that Maggie and I've just put our contact information in the chat. We are available anytime to suggest readings for particular schools and student groups, and we love to do that. So I'm just going to show you a few quick ways to look on our site, and then I'm going to tell you about what we have coming up next. So we are currently publishing Haitian poems, Dominican literature, other literature from the Caribbean on our blog. So that's where you saw that poem. But we also have 7 big country collections that are also interesting to look inside of. And because my group was asking about materials for younger students, I thought I would very quickly demonstrate that to you. So as you all know, reading grade level doesn't necessarily mean that it's appropriate for a particular grade level, but we do have reading grade levels because, of course, there are older students who have lower level reading levels, and we want to meet their needs. But here I will show you a few poems. One poem that's really good for either group, for older students or for young students. It's about being inspired to write. And it's a little less dark and devastating than the poem that we mainly looked at here. So this is a poem from Mexico. It has very simple language, but it is very inspiring and rhythmic. It was originally written in an indigenous language, and if you go into the context tab, you can hear it in that indigenous language as well as in Spanish. So that is one thing that I wanted to show you, and I will show you one other thing, and then I think we'll be done. Okay, so let's say, so that's good for students starting in 1st and 2nd grade. If you go up a little higher for older elementary and say you're not that interested in a poem, maybe you want fiction, there is a great story from Egypt called It's a Chick, Not a Dog, which is about the difference between pets and other kinds of animals you might have in your house and what happens to a chick when it grows up in the house. Anyway, it always starts a lot of different classroom conversations, and yeah, I highly recommend that one too. Okay, so now if you are interested in working with us more on global literature, we have another session coming up where we'll be looking at a story with an Asian boy dealing with bullying and school and friendship. That's on April 4th. That is also free. And Maggie is going to put the link to register to that for that in the chat. And we also have some compensated opportunities. If you get into the site and you start teaching with it, if you have materials to share, we can pay honoraria if we decide to publish. We also are going to do a train the trainer program this summer. And you can learn about all of that by subscribing to our newsletter. Maggie is also going to share a program fact sheet in case you want to share what we do with your school or your district. And finally, please, please, please follow the survey link either here or when you get it in your email. Your feedback means a lot to us. Thanks, everyone. I hope you reach out to us, and I'm going to turn it over to Tingley now.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and thank you so much, Stephanie, for the amazing workshop and so many resources that you share. And thank you all for participating. So right now, I'm just quickly share to wrap up some resource that we mentioned. like Nadia mentioned, please visit the Word Without a Border to check for more resource. And we also want to remind we have the 54th NYS TESOL conference, annual conference is from November 14 to 16. If you're interested, please check the website and register. If you are interested to participate in any journal or blog or MASIC, you can also participate as well. And in the chat box, we also have the survey. If you are interested to the credit, CTL credit, you can also complete the survey. If you have any question, please reach out to our email. If you have any question for Word Without a Border, you can also reach out to Nadia. Thank you so much all for participate. We really appreciate your time and your just present with us. Thank you.